everyone, I am Siri. Welcome to the tutorial about how to move an object along a path. You might wonder what happened to Remo. Don't worry, he's totally fine. I am his co-worker. We're working together on every project that we make, and I am now also doing tutorials which I didn't find the time for in the past. So it's my first tutorial. Be gentle. I chose to do an easy task today, so it's gonna be easier for both of us. So let's dive right into the work. I am working in Blender 2.91, and if you don't understand what I'm doing or what I'm saying, here in the bottom left corner of the screen you can see what I'm doing with my mouse or if I'm hitting something on the keyboard. So you can always quick check this place if you don't understand what I just did. Okay, we're starting out by first creating the sculpture in the middle, the glass sculpture. And we're doing that by adding Shift A. It's the shortcut for adding something into the scene. And we're gonna add a sphere. So this sphere by default has only so and so many vertices. But we need more because we're gonna use the sculpt mode. So there needs to be a little more information that the form doesn't, look cringy in the end. So we're gonna pump up these numbers to about 60 and 60. No, maybe 60 and 50. Yeah, that's about it. And now if you right-click on the object and hit Shade Smooth, it's a very cool and smooth sphere. Now we're changing into the sculpt mode, and you have like thousands of brushes here on the left side of the screen. And you can use those brushes, take time to just find out what every brush does. It's kind of playing with clay as a child, you can do so many things and it's really interesting and you can create so many abstract forms out of that. So if you have the time, take it and just, randomly experiment with what you have. We're gonna use the blob first. It's kind of creates these little bumps that you can, by continuously clicking, make larger. By right clicking you can open the menu for the brush size and also for the strength, where you can also make a big difference in hitting and how big the bump is gonna be. Yeah, and this is a process that kind of just takes time because you can't create the perfect form in 1 minute. By hitting S, it's the shortcut for scale, and afterwards hit Z, it's for the Z axis. You scale an object along just one axis, and I want to stretch this form a little bit out, so it's gonna look more like a sculpture. And it's kind of important to create a form that looks interesting from the angle that you're gonna wanna have to put your camera from afterwards. So we're gonna create a little more bump. And if you have created some bumps into the form and it looks kind of cool and kind of abstract, you can also use, for example, this one. This is just like a kind of a stretch drag brush. And if you look at your sculpture, you kind of want to create, some places where the wire can get really close to it and get to mix together with the form. So it's kind of a, working together composition and not something that is, a sculpture and the wire and it doesn't really fit together as if it was one cool composition. So by dragging some edges out, I just have to choose which one, maybe this one. Brush is still too large. Yeah, by dragging these edges out, you can create cool kind of forms. So if you are happy with the form you created, you might have the same problem as I do. This one here, this is because the mesh didn't have like enough vertices, even though we made more, because we stretched it out so much. There were these really unsexy forms that came out because I wanted to look really smooth, because it's this glass wobble water ball thingy. And we're gonna solve that problem by going back into the object mode and then go into the modifiers section and then choose the subdivision surface. Modifiers are really cool because they don't actually alter your mesh, but they lay kind of an effect on top of it. So this one actually adds kind of more information to your mesh without actually making it. So by pumping those numbers up, you can see that it's already looking quite cool and smooth again. All right, that's how we do the sculpture. We're now gonna make the chain together. Making the chain, we're gonna use the array modifier and the curve modifier, and especially now the screw modifier. Because we're not gonna make the whole chain as a thing, we're gonna make one little part of the chain and use modifiers to kind of create this whole long thing. So it's gonna be easier to handle afterwards, like if you need to make changes. So we're gonna hide our sculpture by hitting this I, so we have a little bit more space to work with. And by pressing Shift and A, we're gonna add a cylinder. We're gonna rotate this cylinder along the y-axis about 90 degrees. You can always change it here in the bottom left. So we're only gonna need this face here to create our wire, this circle. And to delete everything else, we have to go into the edit mode. And by default, you have the vertices that you can choose, but you can, here in the top left, you can change it to faces. And you can choose the face, the circle face, and by hitting Control and I, you can delete everything else by hitting X and then choosing the other faces. So we now have just this circle. So it's important that we stay in the edit mode and duplicate this one to make like these two wires that kind of are twisted around each other. So if you hit Shift and D, you duplicate an object, and before clicking anything, you can hit Z. So the object is only moved around the Z axis, which is what we are gonna need to do, because the chain parts have to go together perfectly, so it has to be on and top of each other. So depending on the space that you have between those circles, the chain is going to have like a lot more space in between or not. This is something that you can kind of experiment with also after we have created the chain. So really important for the curve modifier and the screw modifier to work is that the geometry is placed around the origin, this little red dot here. So we go into the object mode and choose our circles and then geometry to origin. So the circles go to the center of the composition. So now we kind of want to create the chain part by using the screw modifier, because we kind of extrude those two circles into two wires and then twist them around each other, and that's happening with the screw modifier. So in the modifier section here you can choose the screw modifier, and if you pump up the numbers of the screw thing here, you can see that there is a train coming out of nothing. If you don't want it to look so weird, you can always choose it, click right and choose shade smooth, so it has a few smoother lines, and depending on how you want it to look, you can either make this really big or kind of make it smaller. I'm gonna go with about 18, also depending on how large a set is, of course. So after we have this like one little element of the chain, we kind of want to create a whole chain out of it. So we're gonna use the array modifier for that. If you do it by default, it does multiply your chain element, but in the wrong direction. And if you change the factor here to 0 and by the z-axis to 1, you can see that it is multiplied in the right direction. And really important for it to look better in the end, you have these like slices here where you kind of, when the elements are made together, and in the array modifier you can have this little merge field here, and it kind of automatically merges your single elements into one big snake. Yeah. For now it's okay to only have like 2 elements. We're gonna have to change this one later anyway, because the wires have different, you know, lengths. So by now you can't really tell how many of those elements you're gonna need for it to look like a complete chain afterwards. So now we're technically finished with doing the chain. If you're not happy with seeing like those little edges, you can kind of do the same thing as we did with the sculpture. You can use the subdivision surface and you can see that it's already looking a whole lot better. Yeah. If you're happy with the chain, we can now start working on the curves that go around the sculpture, so we can let the chain or the wires go along it. But before we can make the curves, we have to set the camera for the set, because we kind of have to know like where the edges of the format are, so we can create a composition where, you know, like everything fits together really well. That's why I kind of like to set up the camera and all that before I make the curves. For that, if you don't by default already have a camera in your menu, you can hit Shift A and add a camera. Where is it? Here. And by going into the camera mode, you can see what the camera is looking at. Right now it's not so much, that's why we're gonna, oh, the sun came out, it looks beautiful. Here in the view menu, you can activate this little thing here, and if you now move your viewport, the camera goes along with it. My camera by default is set to a square format, because this post is gonna go up on Instagram after I made this tutorial. So that's why I chose it to be square. You can change the properties of the camera here in the output properties menu, and you can see by altering the pixel resolution, it's also gonna change the format of the camera frame on the screen. I'm gonna go with 2000 by 2000 pixels. That should be about enough. And by, you know, having this activated still, you can move the camera a bit around and find an angle that works for you. I'm not very sure yet what I'm gonna do with that one here. All right, don't ever forget to deactivate this one, because if you don't, you're gonna move your camera by accident, as it happened to me 100 times before. It's a bit annoying if you have like special angles and all that, and then accidentally put the camera in a other direction and you don't even realize it. So now we are finally ready to create the curves that move along our sculpture. You can hit Shift A for add again. Oh, Shift A for add, and then add a path. That path by default also has its origin into center, this orange little point here, and if you move by hitting G, grabbing the object, you also move this red little point here. This is something that shouldn't happen. That's why you go into the edit mode and delete everything. It's important that you delete it in edit mode. So you hit A for choosing all the vertices, and then you hit X for deleting the vertices. By hitting Control and right clicking, you can create a new vertex. So if you hit this vertex here and click E, you can extrude the curve or like extrude the vertex, and it automatically creates another vertex. And now you just kind of have to find out yourself, like where do you want the wire to go in your composition and how do you move it. And by hitting E, you can always create more vertices. And by grabbing those handles, like clicking it and hitting G, you can alternate the way the curve is going. If you have worked in Illustrator before, it's kind of exactly the same. If not, don't worry, you're gonna get used to how these curves work really fast. So now it's kind of important to just let your path flow around the composition very cool, and always go back into the camera view to kind of check what it's gonna look like in the final composition, because sometimes from the side it looks really cool and then you go into the camera mode and think, okay, no, what did I do wrong? Yeah, and I think less is more by creating vertices, because the more, you know, edges and curves it has, the higher is the possibility that, you know, the chain is gonna have like weird edges. So you kind of want to create easy curves that are not too narrow, and also kind of still fill out your composition. Alright, if you like what you have done and you come to the point where you have to like connect the two dots to make like one loop chain, you can choose the vertices by just clicking them, and by clicking F, it automatically creates a closed curve out of your two single vertices. And if you quick check what it has done in the camera mode and are happy with that, we can now begin to rotate our chain around this curve. We can do that by going back into the object mode, and now you can activate your chain element. Now you can see it's way too big, and we're gonna change that. So we scale it down. And now we go into the modifier section to add our final modifier, the curve modifier. It's just a modifier that technically bends your object along the curve of your choosing. So now no curve is chosen, so nothing has happened. If we choose this curve, so now you can see that the chain is going around your curve, but it's of course too short. So to change that, you have to go back to the modifier section and then choose the array modifier. You will kind of realize how many of the pieces you will need to fully fill the chain. Yes, this is about it. If you go back to the camera view, you can always check if there are like chains laying on top of each other, because there are too many, and it's something that also happens, but usually it's kind of hidden behind the object, so it doesn't really matter. So now we have this problem that I am not really happy with how the chain looks and how it goes around our object, so I'm gonna change it again really quick. Alright, if you have combined the wire and the chain or the curve to your liking, we can now go into the shading editor, and then we can make the materials for our objects. For the sculpture, we want to do something like a glass material, so you can make a new material by hitting here, new, and by default there is the principled BSDF, but we're going to delete this node by hitting X. By hitting Shift and A, you can add a node, and we're gonna add a glass BSDF, and by connecting it to the surface, you can already see that we now have our glass sculpture. So by default, it is set to the transparency of glass, but you can change it to, I don't know, diamond and everything. You know, you can choose any kind of transparency, and the higher you make it, the less transparent it's gonna be. but it's still gonna reflect everything around it in the world. If you set it to 1, it's gonna be exact transparent. I'm gonna show you really quick so you can see right through it. And 1.45 or something is the glass reflection, and if we pump these numbers up maybe to 2.5, it's a kind of transparent kind of glass where you can still see the reflections. I'm gonna put up the roughness only a tiny little bit so the reflections are not as clear on the object. Maybe I'm gonna put it even a little bit more. So it's a very easy material, and now we're gonna go to the chains. We're gonna make a new material for that too. For the chain, it's kind of important to say that something can either be metallic or not. So either you put it up to 1 or you hold it to 0. All right, we want it to look like metal change, but now it's still kind of rough. So we can put down, wait, I'm gonna enlarge this a little bit. We can put down the roughness a little bit more. Maybe let it reflect like this. And after we have done the basics of the materials, we're gonna now care for the set that we want to build to kind of light everything out in a good way. If you have an object that you kind of want to single out from anything, you usually work with a backdrop in photography. So that's kind of what I want to do. So I'm gonna hit Shift A and add a cube and scale it up. And then I will go into the modifier section and use the bevel modifier, and we're gonna use it because we're gonna need round edges, and that's what this one is perfect for. So maybe make it a little bigger and also higher up the numbers of the edges. You don't need too many because you can, with the shade smooth function, right click shade smooth, you can make it look really cool and smooth. So what we now need to do to get this kind of backdrop, you have to apply this effect. So the mesh is actually altered, and then you go into the edit mode, and then we do the same as we did with the cylinder. We choose the faces that we want, click hit and I, invert the choice, and then we will delete the faces. Alright, now we have this backdrop, and if we go back to object mode, now we have to check if it's set right with the camera. We see no, it's not. So we rotate it by 90 degrees. Oh, minus 90 degrees. And then we can see it's kind of too small, so we hit S for scale and X, and it's bigger. And if we grab it and hit the Z, we can move the edge a little bit further up, like that. All right. Now, by default, you have a little light here in the set. We can delete that, we won't need that anymore. So the baby has cut off my video, so I'm starting new. So I was just about setting up the light. You know, I just also mostly experiment what looks nice, like how do and where do the shadows go and what's an interesting composition. So I am already quite happy with this light setup. I think I'm gonna pump these numbers up a bit more. So now I think everything is just too much in the same color. That's why I am going back to the shading viewport. I am using my chain, and I'm gonna make the chain black, I think. Let's see. Maybe not too. Yeah, it's better. I am still not sure if I like how the chain is going around the sculpture, so I'm gonna alternate that again. And yeah, I think I am happy with what I have done today. And yeah, I really hope you learned something. I'm very, very happy to get feedback, and I'm very, very happy to get tips. And if you have questions, just write it in the comments below. Yeah, and we're always very, very happy to see the work that you have done. So make sure to tag us on Instagram with toericht.cool. Thank you very much again, and I am looking forward to your feedback. Have a nice evening or day or night.